let's discuss the nature of inflation, right? We're going to take this glass of juice. We're going to equate this juice to money, okay? So when we add water to this juice, what happens? The juice effectively becomes less juicy per ounce, okay? So when you add money into an economy, new valueless money, it effectively dilutes the value of the currency, right? But this doesn't necessarily mean it dilutes the value of the wealth of an individual, okay? And I'll explain that. So in this example, we have 3 individuals, stage A, okay? They all have X amount of money in stage A. Now, when we move to stage B, we introduce that new valueless money, right? So everyone's wealth doubles to 2x effectively, okay? Now, again, there's no inequality in this economy. So let's explain a little farther. If we take product P, take the price of that product Y at point A, and we'll define buying power as BP. So buying power at stage A of product P is X over Y. Okay, so it's the wealth of the individual over the price of the product. The buying power at stage B of product P is 2X. It's the new wealth of the individual, of all the individuals in this case, over the new adjusted price 2Y. So buying power remains the same, X over Y. In other words, introducing new valueless money into an economy with no inequality doesn't actually diminish the wealth of any individual. But let's consider an economy with inequality, as every economy in existence ever has. So 3 individuals, stage A, all have different amounts of money. Person 1 has X amount, 2, 2X, 3, 3X. Okay, now when we move to stage B, I'm not actually introducing new valueless money. I'm just representing a state of worsening wealth inequality. So person 1's wealth diminishes, person 2's wealth diminishes, and person 3's wealth expands. Okay, now due to fractional reserve banking, the total wealth at A and B don't actually have to be the same, but that's a different topic, okay? The numbers are arbitrary. So let's define person number 1 as A, and we'll define wealth as W. Now, in this instance, we're defining wealth as the ability to make a living. Okay, we're defining wealth as the means to live within this economy that we're describing. So what's the implication of a person's means to live approaching 0? Like, they die, right? But this isn't what happens in reality, right? People adapt. I mean, in the short term, people adapt, okay? In the long term, everybody dies, but in the short term, people will usually adapt. They'll find a way to live. Okay, but the implication here is that if the economy that we're speaking of is not providing a means to live for an individual, that individual will either die or they will seek other means to make a living outside of that economy. Now, I'll tie this point back in later, but just keep it in the back of your mind. Now let's compare the typical cookie cutter definitions of Democrats and Republicans and how those definitions might feed into our perception of the solutions they provide for wealth inequality. So Democrats, collectivistic, okay, they support regulation, support welfare, right? Now Republicans, individualistic, deregulation, anti-welfare, okay, laissez-faire. Now there's a reason I pointed out that these were the cookie cutter definitions, okay, and that will tie in, okay? Just keep that in the back of your mind as well. Now let's talk about capitalism. Okay, what does capitalism do? What is the purpose? Well, it organizes effort around profit motives, right? That's the nature of a free market. So in the example we had earlier with the economy with inequality, okay, person number 1 is by definition the bad capitalist, and person number 3 is the good capitalist, right? And person number 2 is in between. So we'll define those, all right? We'll find the good capitalist as GC, and we'll define BC as the bad capitalist. By definition, the good capitalist is good at organizing for profit. Bad capitalist is bad at organizing for profit. Okay? Now, we define PO as the ability to organize effort around profit motives, or rather the magnitude at which an individual in this economy is able to organize around profit motives. So, by definition, the PO of the good capitalist is greater than the PO of the bad capitalist. Now, let's bring back that example I had earlier. So, stage A, the wealth of the good capitalist is relatively high to the wealth of the bad capitalist, right? Now, stage B, we introduced the stimulus. Remember, that means-tested stimulus. So at this stage, we're diluting the wealth of the good capitalists. So the wealth of the good capitalists at stage B is less than that of the good capitalists at stage A. Meanwhile, again, the stimulus is getting added to the wealth of the bad capitalists at stage A. So the wealth of the bad capitalists at stage B is greater than that of the bad capitalists at stage A. Now, let's move to stage C, okay? And this is where things get really interesting. So as we move to stage C, what stage C is it's inflation, okay? It is the correction of prices for that new valueless money that was added into the economy, okay? The only way that this stage can occur is if the profit organization ability of the bad capitalists at stage B was less than that of the good capitalists at stage B. Why? Well, because the good capitalist owns the capital, right? That's what is implied by being a good capitalist. If the good capitalist owns the capital, they control the prices. Okay, so the extent to which a good capitalist is good at organizing is the extent to which the effects of stage B are diminished. So the better a good capitalist is at organizing around profit motives, the better that good capitalist is going to be at recuperating their wealth that they lost in stage B. Okay? Well, what does that imply? Well, it implies that the wealth of the good capitalist at stage C will approach the wealth of the good capitalist at stage A, the better they are at organizing around profit motives. Okay? So let's bring back the dichotomy between Democrats and Republicans, okay? The Democrats, what's their strategy? They're going to take wealth of the bad capitalist at stage A and they're going to add wealth to it. And they're going to hope that this diminishes the wealth of the good capitalist, all right? Republicans, laissez-faire, do nothing, again. So let's consider an economy with certain assumptions, okay? Those assumptions are that the profit organization ability of the good capitalist is approaching infinity. And we're also going to assume that the profit organization of the bad capitalist is approaching zero. Okay, so what does this imply? Well, it means that the wealth of the good capitalist is approaching infinity, right? And the wealth of the bad capitalist is approaching zero. This, in effect, is a state of worsening wealth inequality, right? We're describing an economy that is where the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. So tie this back into the Democrat and Republican strategies, right? Democrats take the wealth of the bad capitalist at stage A and they add wealth to it, right? They add that stimulus. Now, if the profit organization abilities of the good capitalist are approaching infinity and the profit organization capabilities of the bad capitalist are approaching zero, what's the implication here? Well, the implication is that the good capitalists are going to reach stage C, okay? They're going to force the market into stage C infinitely fast. And in effect, the value of the stimulus is going to approach zero infinitely fast. So, in effect, the greater the difference between the profit organization ability of the good capitalist and the bad capitalist, the faster the value of that stimulus diminishes. Okay, so let's restate this, all right? As the profit organization ability of the good capitalist approaches infinity and the profit organization ability of the bad capitalist approaches zero, the effect of the democratic economic policy approaches the effect of the Republican economic policy. In other words, in an economy with these assumptions, the Democratic and Republican economic strategies are the same. So, given those assumptions, let's compare how that good and bad capitalist might manifest themselves in a society, okay? So, we'll restate these assumptions, right? Now, how does a good capitalist become a good capitalist? Well, they own things, right? How else do you make money if you don't own things? Okay, they have to own part of a company so that they get dividends from the profits, right? So how do you own things? Well, you invest in stock markets, right? Well, what are publicly traded companies required to do? they're required by law to maximize shareholder profit. Okay, well, how does such a thing happen nowadays with all the technology we have, with high frequency trading, okay, with AI, with these algorithms that are designed to maximize profit, okay? In other words, the profit organization capabilities of the good capitalists are flying at this point in our economy. They are flying through the roof, okay? So, but let's consider the other side. Let's consider the bad capitalists, right? What represents a state of your means to live approaching zero, right? You're poor, right? Poor people, okay? What else? Distress, all right? Crime, okay? Diseases of disparity, okay? So what does this eventually lead to? Well, they lead to one of two things, okay? First is death, okay? Remember when I said the limit of a person as their means approach zero is death, or they seek alternative means? But what are the alternative means? Well, they find means outside of this economy. And that can actually mean two things, okay? It can mean either they literally just exit the economy and they find their own means, grow their own food, whatever it may be, whatever is outside of the society structure, or they change the structure of the economy. Okay, those are the only two ways for these people to not die. Okay, so let's talk about markets for a minute. All right, capitalistic markets in particular. What do capitalistic markets do? All right, again, we already stated that they organize effort around profit motives, right? So what happens when an investment strategy stops working? Okay, well, what that basically means is that the bad capitalists are catching on to the good strategies that the good capitalists are using. So what do the good capitalists have to do in order to remain good capitalists, right? They have to evolve their investment strategy. So in other words, markets are conscious, right? They're consciously evolving all the time. Okay, the good capitalists have to evolve their investment strategies to remain good capitalists. So what that means is the markets make decisions based on future expectations, right? So what controls future expectations? Broadly speaking, human perception controls future expectations, right? I mean, if humanity perceives iPhones as a valuable product, then a good capitalist would probably want to invest in Apple, right? But what controls perception? Okay, again, very broadly speaking, so as not to leave anything out here, environment controls perception, right? So then who or what controls the environment? I think it's easiest if we divide this into two categories, okay? We divide it into unnatural factors and natural factors, right? So in effect, we have two different origins of human perception, right? We have those factors which originate from humanity and those that originate from everything but humanity, right? So let's focus on the unnatural factors, right? The factors within our control, okay? So how does humanity affect its own perception? Well, simple answer, right? Communication. Right? We talk to each other, we read, we teach, we learn, we communicate. I mean, the process of one human learning from another is the creation of perception itself, right? At least the perception that we control. So how do we communicate? Well, we are increasingly using our own technology to communicate with each other. What does that imply? Well, it implies we're watching media to learn and we're using media to teach, to create that human perception, or at least the portion we control. And who are the predominant voices in that media? By definition, the mainstream media, right? They earned the title mainstream. You don't just give that to everybody. I don't get that title, right? So let's keep that in mind as we move on, all right? So the mainstream media is the predominant media, right? What does that mean? Well, they beat the market, right? These mainstream media platforms, they're publicly traded. So that means that these publicly traded companies are at the top of their particular market. So by definition, mainstream media are good capitalists, right? They're some of the best. Okay? And how do they get there? Well, everyone and the mother knows they did it by pushing divisive content. Okay? Why? Well, it seems to me that humans just have a natural inclination to be drawn to controversial content. And I suspect that inclination is a function of the inequality in the system, but that's for a different conversation, right? All that's relevant right now is that the mainstream media got to where it's at today largely by pushing divisive content. Okay, so again, we already declared that like the mainstream media has the power to change public perception, or predominant power, okay? Otherwise, they wouldn't have earned the title mainstream, right? And we also know that the mainstream media is a good capitalist, right? Perhaps some of the best capitalists, right? They're approaching the 0.1%. Okay, now remember, we defined a good capitalist as an owner, right? They own the rights to the profits, okay? So what do the best capitalists have? Well, they don't just invest in one stock, right? They have diversified portfolios, okay? Now, these two things might not seem to have any significant connection, okay? But hold that thought. All right, let's take this other example, right? We're going to say that as the profit organization ability of the good capitalist approaches infinity, A approaches C, okay? So, in other words, consciousness, market consciousness of the good capitalist is going to approach infinity as A approaches C, okay? So, as we move from A to C, we're observing the natural evolution of investing strategies by good capitalists in response to an economy that repeatedly puts new money in without value creation. Okay, in stage A, say economic policy creators just released a stimulus bill, okay, and they printed new money to do it, okay, and it's means tested as well, so it's going to the bad capitalists, right? Now, in this instance, the mainstream media sees this new stimulus bill with this new valueless money being put in the economy. And what do? Well, they profit from divisive content. So they tell people that the new money being put in the economy is going to cause inflation. So now the public expects inflation. So how does the market respond? Well, it inflates, all right? The prices get inflated. They correct for that new valueless money, right? And what does the good capitalist do in this stage? Well, a good capitalist will recognize that the stimulus bill is going to cause divisive content in media, who is going to create hysteria around that new valueless money, and they'll time their investments to profit from the inflation when it corrects. But again, the market's conscious, so this only works for so long. Eventually, every time there's a stimulus bill, everyone invests in a couple companies that tend to jack prices up. So what's the next step? Well, next step is to acquire mainstream media, right? That's stage B consciousness. Now, in this stage, the good capitalist becomes a great capitalist. Why? Because now they control the narrative, because they control the mainstream media. They have a hold of that profitable divisiveness, okay? And they can control the hysteria around a new stimulus bill, for example. So now they can even time their investments better. But again, the market evolves, okay? This investment strategy loses potency as time goes on, okay? Now, what's important to point out here is that in stage A and B, this is still free market capitalism, right? The wealth of the bad capitalist can approach the wealth of the good capitalist so long as the profit organization ability of the bad capitalist can improve, right? So let's talk about stage C. Stage C is when those same great capitalists in stage B acquire the power to write the stimulus bills. Now, this fundamentally breaks the logic of the system, okay? It removes the freedom from the economy. It removes the free market capitalism from the economy, okay? Because the good capitalists, the best capitalists, are effectively puppeteering the system at this point. Okay, these capitalists have knowledge that the rest of the market does not have, okay, at stage C. In other words, they're not even capitalists. They've corrupted the system. They've removed the freedom from the market. And in turn, they've removed the upward mobility of the bad capitalist. So in a market that has reached stage C, okay, at stage C, the profit organization ability of the bad capitalist is approaching zero, and the profit organization ability of the good capitalist is approaching infinity, okay? This stage will occur given two assumptions: given that mainstream media has a profit motive and that mainstream media has predominant control over human perception. This is what capitalism does. It is the evolution of investing strategies. So remember when I pointed out there was a connection between diversified portfolios and the power to change public perception? Well, when you give those two things to the same people, you enable them to reach stage C consciousness. Now, this is interesting because it has implications as to what's going on in this country right now. So what would be the indicator of stage C consciousness? Well, let's think about this. So if a market is free and a stimulus bill adds valueless money into that market, what happens? The prices inflate, right? But the prices can only inflate insofar as the new valueless money, the stimulus, mathematically allows, assuming the market is free. In other words, if we see an overcorrection of inflation in response to a stimulus bill in the long term, accompanied by worsening wealth inequality, then we have proof of stage C consciousness. Okay, it's proof of corruption. Now, this might not be enlightening, right? We know there's corrupt politicians, okay? We know there's lobbying, okay? We know all this. We saw the video of Nancy Pelosi admitting that she is okay with stage C capitalism in quotes, right? But let's write this out, all right? So we say that the magnitude to which prices overcorrect for new valueless money in an economy is a positive function of the magnitude of both mainstream media's control over perception and mainstream media's profit motive. Okay, so now let's define some terms, okay? We'll define OP as the overcorrected price. We'll define HM as the mainstream media's level of control over perception. And I honestly can't remember why I labeled that HM. Just go with it. And we'll label PM as mainstream media's profit motive, right? So as mainstream media's level of control over perception approaches infinity, and mainstream media's profit motive approaches infinity, okay, overcorrected price is going to approach infinity. So in other words, if your perception predominantly comes from a media platform that is traded publicly, you empirically support inflation going to infinity. You are empirically supporting the collapse of the US dollar. Okay? Now, why is this? Well, if your perception predominantly comes from a media platform that is traded publicly, that means that media platform has a profit motive. That means they're bound by law to maximize profit. So if you get your perception from that media platform, you are supporting the vicious cycle of wealth inequality that we've been led into by this corrupted version of capitalism. So let's bring back those cookie cutter definitions of what Democrats and Republicans do to reduce wealth inequality. Okay? Well, the theory is that the Democrats add stimulus and the Republicans laissez-faire, right? Well, if we look at 2020, that's not really what happened. Okay, 2020, the Republican Party released a stimulus bill. Okay, and then again, the Democratic Party released a stimulus bill. Now, of course, these were in response to COVID, right? But it's not about what they were in response to. It's about the effect. So, again, they're both printing money during recessions, okay? And they're not itemizing the source of this new cash, right? The source is the printer, and the proof is the deficit. So, again, we have worsening wealth inequality as a response to the stimulus bill and the inflation, the overcorrection of the inflation that the stimulus bill caused. Okay, this is proof of stage C consciousness, okay? It's proof that the system has been corrupted. It's proof that the profit organization ability of the good capitalist is approaching infinity. And those good capitalists have infiltrated both the Democratic and Republican parties, okay? So why is this a problem? Well, it's a problem because the Democrats and Republicans have vastly different views on social rights, okay? So what happens? Well, if we take capitalism to its logical conclusion, the mainstream media is going to evolve. What are they going to do? They're going to use these social rights, this divide on social rights between the Dems and the Republicans, and they're going to run with it. They're going to use it to divide the public and distract them from the fact that they are stage C capitalists. And what is the mainstream media doing right now? They're dividing people on social rights, right? They talk about gun rights, they talk about abortion, racial issues, free speech rights, you know. Now, the one thing they're not talking about is the existence of stage C capitalists, okay? They're not talking about the corruption. And in fact, what they might talk about is the competing narrative, okay? The narrative that printing new money without value causes inflation. Now, that's true, but if the media creates so much hysteria around that effect, then what happens? Well, the people start to perceive that all of the inflation that's occurring is due to the printing of that new money, okay? They don't even think to blame something else, okay? Why? Because the mainstream media is creating their perceptions. So divide and conquer, okay? It's a very simple strategy. It's been used for centuries, right? It's been used probably in every single civilization that's ever existed. And you know what? All of them have failed because they don't catch on, because they're divided. So, in conclusion, if the profit motive of media is not removed, or mainstream media maintains predominant control over perception, wealth equality will get worse, and all the social strife that the media uses to divide us will worsen as well. Okay? It's always been a class war. Right? If you sit here and get distracted in these social battles, the very economy that you exist in will collapse, and it won't matter what race you are, it won't matter what your pronouns are, it won't matter if you're allowed to talk on Twitter, it doesn't matter. Now, the interesting thing about this phenomenon is that as the profit organization ability of the good capitalist approaches infinity, their ability to organize profit motives long term approaches zero. And that might seem like invalid logic at first, but the fact is that occurrence happens after stage C, which is when the break in the system occurs, when the freedom is removed from the market. In other words, these good capitalists either don't know what they're doing, or they're banking on dying before the shit hits the fan. Now, it's possible that the good capitalists do become conscious of this, okay? That they, in effect, will diminish their own profit motive in order to keep the system alive, or keep the economy running. But based on history, man, I don't have very much hope in that outlook. The human ego is too strong. The instinctual greed is too powerful. We have to increase consciousness around this conversation, okay? Otherwise, we're doomed. If this resonates with anyone, if anyone made it this far, I appreciate your time. Feel free to leave a comment. I'll try to get back to you, but more importantly, share.